Hi.
Hey everyone, I never thought I'd be the guy to post here, but my life has taken such a turn that I need to get this out. Maybe someone out there has been through something similar. Maybe you'll tell me I'm crazy. I don't know. But here goes. I had what I thought was a perfect life. Married for 12 years, 2 kids, 11 and 8, and a steady job that provided well for my family. My wife, Jessica, was someone I truly loved. I gave her everything. I worked late nights so she could stay home with the kids, took her on trips, always made time for date nights, all that stuff. I never saw this coming. Turns out she did. One night, she sat me down on the couch, real serious, and said, "I need to tell you something, and I want you to listen without getting mad." That sentence alone should have been a red flag the size of Texas. But like an idiot, I just nodded. "I've been feeling really disconnected from you lately," she started. "I love you, but I need more. So, I've decided that I'm going to sleep with someone else." I laughed. Honest to God, I thought she was joking. Who warns their husband they're about to cheat? I said something like, "That's not how marriage works, Jess." She just sighed like I was the crazy one. "I'm telling you this now so it won't be cheating. I don't want to lie to you." I sat there stunned. I couldn't even process it. Before I could say anything, she stood up, kissed my forehead, and said, "I'll be back later." And she left. I don't know how long I sat there. My hands were shaking. My mind was racing. I kept telling myself she wouldn't actually do this. She just wants attention. She's testing me. At some point, I checked the location tracker on her phone. She was at a hotel across town. That's when I knew. I wanted to call her. Wanted to scream. But instead, I just sat there, numb, staring at the little blinking dot on my screen. My wife, the mother of my children, was out right now doing God knows what with God knows who. She didn't come home until 3 a.m. She walked in like nothing happened, tossed her purse on the counter, and stretched like she just got back from yoga. I was still awake, sitting on the couch in the dark. "So, who was it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She blinked at me like I was being dramatic. "Does it really matter?" And that's when it hit me, she wasn't sorry. She wasn't remotely sorry. In her mind, she had just done something completely reasonable. And now it was my job to deal with it. I didn't yell. I didn't throw things. I just stood up, grabbed my keys, and walked out. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to be anywhere but there. I drove all night that I don't remember much of that night. Just me driving around, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, my brain spinning in circles. How do you even process something like that? Your wife straight up telling you she's gonna cheat and acting like you should be fine with it? I must have driven for hours. I ended up parked outside a diner, staring at the neon, "Open 24 hours" sign, not even realizing I had pulled in. I went inside, sat down, and just stared at the menu. Didn't order anything. Just sat there. At some point my phone buzzed. "Jessica, are you really gonna act like a child about this?" That was the moment. That was the exact second I knew our marriage was over. Not when she left for the hotel. Not when she walked back in at 3 a.m. like nothing happened. But when she had the audacity to text me like I was the one ruining things. I didn't respond. I just turned off my phone and sat there in silence. Eventually, I drove back home. It was around 6 a.m. I walked in, and Jessica was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee like she had all the time in the world. "Are you done sulking?" she asked, not even looking up from her phone. I couldn't even speak. I just stared at her. "Listen," she sighed, finally putting the phone down. "I get that this is a lot for you. But I was honest with you. That's what matters. If I wanted to be sneaky, I wouldn't have told you. But I did. Because I respect you. That has to count for something, right?" I swear to God, she said it like she deserved a medal for telling me she was going to cheat before she did it. "You don't respect me," I finally managed to say. My voice didn't even sound like my own. "You just wanted to clear your conscience before doing whatever you wanted." She frowned like I had disappointed her somehow. I was hoping you'd be more mature about this. That was it. That was my breaking point. I leaned in, stared her right in the eye, and said, "Get ready for a divorce, Jessica." She actually laughed. "You're not leaving me," she said, all smug. "You love me too much." I didn't say anything. Just turned around and walked up to our bedroom. She didn't follow me. She didn't ask me to stay. She just went back to scrolling on her phone like nothing had happened. That's when I realized she thought she had already won. And I knew in that moment I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to make her regret everything. I don't remember much of that night. Just me driving around, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, my brain spinning in circles. How do you even process something like that? Your wife straight up telling you she's gonna cheat and acting like you should be fine with it? I must have driven for hours. I ended up parked outside a diner, staring at the neon "Open 24 hours" sign, not even realizing I had pulled in. I went inside, sat down, and just stared at the menu. Didn't order anything. Just sat there. At some point my phone buzzed. "Jessica, are you really gonna act like a child about this?" That was the moment. That was the exact second I knew our marriage was over. Not when she left for the hotel. Not when she walked back in at 3 a.m. like nothing happened. But when she had the audacity to text me like I was the one ruining things. I didn't respond. I just turned off my phone and sat there in silence. Eventually, I drove back home. It was around 6 a.m. I walked in, and Jessica was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee like she had all the time in the world. "Are you done sulking?" she asked, not even looking up from her phone. I couldn't even speak. I just stared at her. "Listen," she sighed, finally putting the phone down. "I get that this is a lot for you. But I was honest with you. That's what matters. If I wanted to be sneaky, I wouldn't have told you. But I did. Because I respect you. That has to count for something, right?" I swear to God, she said it like she deserved a medal for telling me she was going to cheat before she did it. "You don't respect me," I finally managed to say. My voice didn't even sound like my own. "You just wanted to clear your conscience before doing whatever you wanted." She frowned like I had disappointed her somehow. "I was hoping you'd be more mature about this." That was it. That was my breaking point. I leaned in, stared her right in the eye, and said, "Get ready for a divorce, Jessica." She actually laughed. "You're not leaving me," she said, all smug. "You love me too much." I didn't say anything. Just turned around and walked up to our bedroom. She didn't follow me. She didn't ask me to stay. She just went back to scrolling on her phone like nothing had happened. That's when I realized she thought she had already won. And I knew in that moment I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to make her regret everything. I walked into the lawyer's office feeling like I was in a bad dream. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be at home with my kids, maybe grilling in the backyard, living the life I thought I had. But no. Instead, I was sitting across from some guy in a suit, explaining how my wife cheated on me with my full knowledge and then had the nerve to say I was the one ruining the family. The lawyer, let's call him Dan, listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Man, I've heard a lot of stories, but this is a new one. Tell me about it." "So, let me get this straight," he said, rubbing his chin. "Your wife told you she was going to cheat, she did it, and now she's blaming you for wanting a divorce?" Yup. And she's trying to turn the kids against you?" "Working on it," I muttered. Dan nodded. "All right. First things first, stop talking to her about the divorce. Don't give her a heads up on anything. From this moment on, you need to play it smart. Gather evidence, document everything. You still have access to the bank accounts?" Yeah. Good. Keep it that way. We're going to make sure she doesn't screw you over financially." I felt a little wave of relief. Finally, someone was on my side. Then Dan hit me with a question I wasn't ready for. "Are you ready to fight for custody?" Custody? See, up until that moment, I hadn't even considered that Jessica might try to take the kids away from me. But the second Dan said it, I knew she would. She was already spinning her little lies, planting seeds in their heads. And if she got full custody? I'd be reduced to some weekend visitor in my own kids' lives. I couldn't let that happen. Yeah, I said, sitting up straighter. Yeah, I'm ready to fight. And just like that, the setup began. I wasn't just going to leave Jessica. I was going to make sure she lost everything. After that meeting with Dan, I knew I had to be careful. Jessica was already playing dirty, setting up a story where I was the villain. If I wasn't smart, she'd have everyone, including my own kids, thinking I was some heartless monster who abandoned them. So I started playing my own game. First, I acted normal. I didn't bring up the divorce again. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I just went about my day like nothing had changed. That threw Jessica off big time. So, are we good now? She asked one night, tilting her head like she was waiting for me to apologize. I'm just thinking, I said casually. Trying to figure out what's best for the kids. That was technically true. I was figuring out how to make sure she didn't screw them up with her lies. In the meantime, I started gathering evidence. I backed up everything: bank statements, text messages, even notes about our conversations. I started recording the little digs she threw at me when the kids weren't around. And then, just as I was building my case, she made her biggest mistake yet. One night, she came home late. Again. But this time, she wasn't smug. She wasn't even trying to rub it in my face. She looked worried. What's wrong? I asked, pretending to care. She hesitated, biting her lip. I think we should go to therapy. I almost laughed in her face. Therapy? She blew up our marriage, manipulated our kids, and now she wanted to sit in a room and have some stranger tell me to understand her feelings? But I didn't react. I just nodded. Maybe. I saw the relief in her eyes. She thought I was breaking. She thought she was winning. And that's when I knew she was scared. Maybe her affair wasn't going as planned. Maybe she realized she had pushed too far. Or maybe she was starting to see the cracks in her own plan. Whatever it was, it didn't matter. Because now, I was in control. I kept playing along. I nodded at all the right moments, acted like I was thinking about therapy, and even started responding to her texts again. I wasn't trying to fix our marriage, I was setting her up. But just when I thought I had a handle on things, Jessica dropped another bomb on me. It happened one afternoon when I went to pick up the kids from school. My son, Evan, 11, barely looked at me when he got in the car. My daughter, Sophie, 8, was quiet, which was weird because she was usually full of stories about her day. Everything okay? I asked. Evan just shrugged. Sophie kept her eyes on her lap. Something was off. Later that night, when I was helping Sophie brush her hair, she finally spoke up. Mommy said you don't love us anymore. My heart stopped. A what? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She said you're leaving us, Sophie sniffled. That you don't want to be our daddy anymore. I felt like I was going to be sick. Jessica wasn't just lying to me now. She was poisoning our kids. I had to swallow down every ounce of rage I had in me. Blowing up in front of Sophie wouldn't help. Instead, I pulled her into my arms and hugged her tight. That's not true, sweetheart, I whispered. I will always be your daddy. No matter what happens. She clung to me, and I could feel her little shoulders shaking. And right then, I made a decision. It wasn't enough to leave Jessica. It wasn't even enough to take my kids with me. I had to make sure they knew the truth. Jessica wanted to play dirty? Fine. She had no idea what was coming next. That night, after Sophie finally fell asleep, I sat in the dark, gripping my phone so tight my fingers hurt. My kids thought I was abandoning them. Jessica had lied to their faces, filling their little heads with poison. I wasn't going to let her win. So I called Dan. As she's turning the kids against me, I said the second he picked up. Dan sighed like he had seen this 1,000 times before. Figures. We need to get ahead of this. Are you keeping records? Everything. Good. We need proof she's manipulating them. Courts take parental alienation seriously. You'll need witnesses too. Have the kids said anything like this to anyone else? I thought about it. Then it hit me, Sophie's teacher. Mrs. Carter had always been sweet to Sophie, and I knew she was the kind of person who would notice if something was wrong. Yeah, I'll find out, I told Dan. The next day, I dropped Sophie off at school like usual. But instead of leaving right away, I walked straight to the front office and asked to speak with Mrs. Carter. When she saw me, she smiled then frowned. Is everything okay? She asked. I took a deep breath. Can I ask you something? Have Sophie or Evan said anything weird about me lately? She hesitated. And then, just like that, I knew. Please, I pressed. I need to know. She sighed. Sophie's been quiet the past few days. Yesterday, I asked her what was wrong and she said. Mrs. Carter paused, then gave me a look. She said you don't love them anymore. My stomach twisted. I knew something was off, she continued. I told her that wasn't true. That parents always love their kids, even if things change at home. Did she say who told her that? Mrs. Carter nodded. She said her mommy did. That was it. That was the proof I needed. I thanked her and left, my hands shaking. Jessica had no idea I was onto her. And now? I had my first real weapon. I had proof now. Jessica was actively turning the kids against me. But proof wasn't enough. If I took this to court, she'd play the perfect mother routine, cry about how I misunderstood everything, and act like I was just bitter about the affair. No, I needed more. I needed her to expose herself. So I set a trap. That night, when the kids were asleep, I casually brought up our situation while Jessica was scrolling through her phone. I've been thinking, I said. Maybe we should have a real talk about what we tell the kids. Jessica looked up, raising an eyebrow. Oh? And what do you mean by that? Well, I shrugged, keeping my voice super neutral. They're confused. We should make sure they don't feel like they're losing either of us. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. I don't know, babe, she said slowly. I think they already understand what's happening. Oh? And what's that? I asked, tilting my head. She smirked. I swear to God, she smirked. That their daddy doesn't want to be here anymore. Boom. There it was. And who told them that? I asked, forcing myself to sound curious instead of enraged. She shrugged. I mean, they see it, don't they? You're checked out, you're distant. I don't have to tell them anything. They can feel it. I just nodded. And let my phone keep recording in my pocket. Oh yeah. I was getting everything on record now. Jessica thought she was so smart. She thought she was playing me. But in reality? She just handed me exactly what I needed. With that recording in my pocket, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: power. Jessica had been running the show, spinning her little web of lies, but now? Now, I had the scissors to cut right through it. I sent the recording straight to Dan. He responded almost immediately. Dan, this is gold. Keep going. Don't let her know you're onto her yet. So that's exactly what I did. I played along. I let Jessica believe she was winning. I kept acting distant, just enough to feed into the image she was building of me. And while she was busy thinking I was crumbling, I was documenting everything. Meanwhile, I started preparing for the custody battle. I met with another lawyer who specialized in family court. I told her everything: Jessica's affair, the way she was manipulating the kids, the recording I had. She nodded like she had heard this 100 times before. Judges don't like parental alienation, she said. If we can prove she's turning the kids against you, you'll have a real shot at primary custody. I was ready. And then, right when I thought I had control of the situation, Jessica threw another curveball. One afternoon, I got a call from my son's school. Principal, Mr. Carter, we need you to come in. There's been an incident with Evan. My heart dropped. I rushed over, barely remembering to park before running inside. I expected a fight, maybe some trouble with another kid. I wasn't expecting what I saw. Evan, sitting in the principal's office, arms crossed, face red from crying. And Jessica? Jessica was sitting across from him, fake tears in her eyes, rubbing his back like she was the mother of the year. The second Evan saw me, his face twisted in anger. I don't want to go home with you, he snapped. It was like a punch to the gut. I turned to the principal. What's going on? She hesitated, glancing at Jessica. Evan had an outburst in class. He got upset and said he doesn't trust his father anymore. I felt my jaw tighten. I looked at Jessica and for the first time she wouldn't meet my eyes. That's when I knew she had finally done it. She had turned my own son against me. And I wasn't sure how to fix it, sitting in that office, looking at my son's tear-streaked face while Jessica pretended to be the perfect mother. I felt something inside me snap. I wasn't losing my kids. Not to her. I took a deep breath, forced myself to stay calm, and crouched down to Evan's level. Hey bud, I said softly. You want to tell me what's going on? He didn't look at me. Mom said you're leaving us, he muttered. As she said you don't want to be a family anymore. Jessica sniffled dramatically. I tried to explain it gently, she murmured, dabbing at imaginary tears. I ignored her. Evan, I said, keeping my voice steady, that's not true. I love you and your sister more than anything. Nothing will ever change that. He finally looked at me, his little face twisted with confusion. Then why are you leaving? And there it was. The lie she had drilled into his head. I didn't get mad. I didn't snap. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and pressed play on the recording. Jessica's voice filled the office. That their daddy doesn't want to be here anymore. Her exact words. Evan's eyes widened. His little hands clenched into fists. Jessica froze. Where did you, she started, but I cut her off. You lied to him. My voice was cold, steady. You sat there and filled his head with nonsense just to hurt me. But you didn't just hurt me, Jess. You hurt him. Evan turned to her, his voice shaking. You lied? Jessica's face turned pale. Sweetheart, I... Stop, he snapped, standing up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. You lied to me. Jessica stammered, her eyes darting around the room like she was looking for an escape. The principal, who had been silent this whole time, cleared her throat. Mrs. Carter, I think you and I need to have a conversation. Jessica's face fell. I took a deep breath, then turned to Evan. Listen, bud, I said gently. I know this is confusing. But I need you to trust me, okay? I would never leave you. And I would never lie to you. He stared at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. I want to go home with Dad. Jessica's mouth dropped open. But sweetheart. I want to go home with Dad, he shouted. And just like that, the spell she had over him? It broke. She wasn't winning anymore. I was. Jessica sat there, completely stunned. She had spent weeks feeding Evan lies, twisting the story, turning him against me. And now? With one recording, it all crumbled. The principal gave me a look, one that said she knew exactly what had been happening but had been waiting for proof. I think it's best if Evan goes home with his father today, she said firmly. Jessica turned to her, eyes wide. Wait, you're believing him? She asked, her voice rising. I'm believing the recording, Mrs. Carter, the principal said smoothly. And I'm concerned that Evan has been given misleading information. Jessica's face turned red. So now I'm the bad guy? I was just trying to protect my kids. Evan flinched. He flinched. I stood up, putting a hand on his shoulder. Let's go, bud. Jessica shot up, panic flashing across her face. Wait, no. You can't just take him. The principal folded her arms. He can. There's no custody order in place yet, which means both parents have equal rights. Evan is choosing to go with his father. I didn't waste another second. I guided Evan out of the office, my heart pounding. As we walked through the hallway, I felt his little hand grip my sleeve. Dad? He asked quietly. Yeah, bud? I think Mom is lying about other stuff too. I stopped in my tracks. Like what? He hesitated, looking down at his shoes. She said you had a girlfriend. My stomach twisted. Who did she say it was? He frowned, thinking. She didn't say a name. Just that you had someone else and that's why you don't want to be with her. Unbelievable. Jessica wasn't just turning the kids against me, she was trying to paint me as the cheater. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to stay calm. That's not true, Evan. I don't have a girlfriend. I've been focused on you and Sophie. That's it. He nodded slowly. Okay. I believe you. And just like that, another one of Jessica's lies started falling apart. But I wasn't done yet. She wanted to lie? Manipulate? Tear me down? Fine. Now it was my turn. After I got Evan home, I sat him down and made sure he was okay. I didn't want him caught in the crossfire any more than he already was. He was confused, hurt, but most of all, he knew now. Jessica had been lying to him. Is Sophie gonna believe me? He asked hesitantly. That question hit me hard. Because I didn't know. Jessica still had full control over Sophie. And if she was willing to lie about me having a girlfriend, there was no telling what else she was planting in her head. I had to get ahead of this. So I made a plan. First, I called my lawyer, Dan. Jessica's telling the kids I have a girlfriend, I told him. Dan let out a sharp breath. A classic deflection. She's trying to make you look like the villain. But here's the good news, she's unraveling. When people start making desperate lies like this, it means they feel like they're losing control. So what do? We need solid proof of parental alienation. Keep recording. Keep documenting. If she starts slipping up again, get it on record. Then Dan dropped the real bombshell. If we push this right, we can fight for full custody. Full custody. That was something I hadn't let myself hope for. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it was possible. Jessica had already started exposing herself. I just had to make sure she finished the job. The next part of my plan was riskier. I had to talk to Jessica alone. Not to argue. Not to fight. I had to let her think she was winning again. So the next evening, when Evan was in his room, I called Jessica and asked her to come over. She showed up looking smug, like she thought I was about to cave. Finally ready to listen to reason? She asked, stepping inside like she still owned the place. I didn't react. I just sat down and gestured for her to do the same. Jess, I started, keeping my voice calm, I don't want to fight anymore. The kids don't deserve that. Her smirk grew. She thought I was breaking. That's what I've been saying, she said, crossing her arms. So, are we working things out? I paused, letting her believe I was considering it. Then I sighed. I just don't know if I can trust you after everything, I said carefully. I mean, the kids believe I have a girlfriend now. Where did they even get that idea? Jessica waved a hand dismissively. Bo, come on. They just assumed. Did they? I asked. And that's when she made her mistake. She rolled her eyes and muttered, well, maybe I helped them assume. And just like that. Another. Jessica had no idea what she'd just done. She thought she was casually brushing off her lie, thought she was still controlling the narrative. But in reality? She had just handed me the final piece of proof I needed. I didn't react. I just nodded like I was accepting her excuse. I get it, I said, keeping my voice neutral. You were just trying to protect the kids, right? She perked up instantly like she thought I was finally understanding her side. Exactly, she said, flipping her hair like she had just won some argument. I mean, what was I supposed to tell them? That you don't love me anymore? I wanted to laugh in her face. Instead, I just sighed. You're right, I said. I guess this whole thing just got messy. Jessica relaxed. That was her biggest weakness. She always assumed she was the smartest person in the room. That everyone else was playing checkers while she was playing chess. But she didn't realize? I had already checkmated her. After she left, I sent the new recording straight to Dan. His response came almost immediately. Dan, this is it. She's digging her own grave. We move first thing Monday morning. Move. As in file for full custody. It was happening. I barely slept that night. Not because I was anxious, because I was ready. For the first time since this nightmare started, I knew without a doubt that I was going to win. But Jessica? She was about to realize she had already lost. Monday morning, I walked into my lawyer's office with every piece of evidence I had, every recording, every text, every false accusation Jessica had thrown at me. Dan was already waiting. You ready? He asked, sliding the custody paperwork across the table. I didn't hesitate. Let's do this. By noon, the petition was filed. I was officially fighting for full custody of Evan and Sophie. And because I had clear evidence of parental alienation, my case was strong. The moment Jessica got served, she lost it. My phone started blowing up calls, texts, voicemails. Jessica, what the hell is this? Jessica, you're taking this too far. Jessica, you're not taking my kids from me, you monster. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The legal system was already moving. But then? Jessica made one last desperate move. That evening she showed up at my house. Pounding on the door. Screaming. Crying. You're ruining my life, she wailed. How could you do this? I didn't open the door. I just stood there, phone in hand, recording everything. Then, she said the worst thing yet. You're trying to take them away? Fine. Let's see how they feel when I tell them you cheated on me. And that was it. She had no argument left. No truth left. Just more lies. And the best part? I had it all on tape. Jessica thought she was still in control. She had no idea she had just destroyed herself. Jessica had no idea that her meltdown at my door was the last nail in her coffin. I had the entire thing recorded, her screaming, her false accusations, her outright saying she was going to lie to the kids to turn them against me. The next morning, I sent it straight to Dan. His response? Dan, this is it. This is what wins us full custody. Within 24 hours, my lawyer filed for an emergency custody hearing. Because Jessica had been caught on record actively manipulating the kids, the court took it seriously. And when we walked into that courtroom, Jessica wasn't smug anymore. She wasn't in control anymore. She looked terrified. Dan laid out everything, the recordings, the teacher's statement, the school incident, and finally, the audio of Jessica threatening to lie about me cheating. Her lawyer tried to spin it, tried to make it seem like she was just be emotional and a concern for the kids. But the judge wasn't buying it. Not after hearing her own words. Then came the ruling. Primary custody granted to me. Jessica, limited visitation, pending a court-monitored review. I had won. Jessica broke down right there in court, sobbing like she was the victim. But for once, I didn't care. I walked out of that courthouse with my kids. With my proof. With my life finally free of her lies. And when I got home, Evan hugged me. Sophie clung to my side. And for the first time in months I felt at peace. Jessica had spent so long trying to destroy me. But in the end, she only destroyed herself.
Goodbye.